Suspense and tension are crackling in the air as the straw poll ballots begin to be counted. We hear the gnashing of teeth of some who voted too early. We hear the shallow breathing of some who hope their candidate will prevail. We feel the cold glare of envy coming westward from Ames, Iowa. They don't want their straw poll upstaged by the great new Denver straw poll. It's all happening right here, right now, at the Denver Marriott City Center, whose staff deserves one more round of thanks from us. Our terrific event manager, Dion Sanchez, I was complimenting him this morning. I bet some of you have had the same experience that Donna and I have had. Every employee of this hotel, when they spotted our badges, I could tell we were important to them. We felt we were made to feel like their personal guests. And it is to their credit, and it has they're unsung heroes and heroines of helping us have a wonderful summit. Many said we couldn't have improved on last year. It was great in itself. I think this year we've taken it a step further, and we look forward to working with you as the tradition extends into the decisive year of 2012. But we must remember this is also an election year across Colorado. You'll receive ballots in the mail in October to vote for municipal and county and school board officials. We've just been joined by a wonderful Republican in office not quite a year who upset an incumbent Democrat with his common sense warning that we needed honest elections, ballot integrity, and votes when they're counted, you could count on them being for real. I'd like you to welcome Colorado's Chief Elections Officer, Secretary of State Scott Gessler.
You want me to say
Please do, yeah.
Well, it's great to be here among conservatives. You know, I was criticized the other month for saying that I was in office to further conservative values, and people sort of thought that that was partisan, and it's not. Because conservatism, I think, is a philosophy of government that transcends any political party. And to me, conservatism in office means, election integrity, photo identification, proof of citizenship, common sense things to make sure that we've got fair and honest elections. So John, thank you very much for giving me a moment, and thank you for being here and for all you do.
Secretary of State Scott Gessler, I should say that if they had not been traveling, well, in the one case, Attorney General John Suthers, great friend of ours, a Republican, a conservative, someone who has led the battle of state attorneys general suing over the constitutionality of Obamacare. General Suthers sent his regrets. He's traveling this weekend. Another Republican newly in office that lots of you helped to put there, State Treasurer Walker Stapleton. He's in, I think he's keeping the same kind of vigil that we heard Herman Cain describe so touchingly and dramatically. There's a slow baby a-coming in the Stapleton family, they tell me. Other than that, Walker would have been with us this weekend as well. Before we come to the concluding, crowning speaker of the summit, I have a special guest that I want to call up here. You've heard him introduced and saluted eloquently on opening night by Bill Armstrong, and then, being no stranger to the microphone, he took the mic and asked a pointed question out of personal memory of a great moment in the U.S. Senate he directed to Rick Santorum. But by popular demand, we can't conclude the summit without bringing Jim Dobson up here one more time, and I've got a couple questions for Dr. Dobson. I asked him if he'd give impromptu remarks. He said, "No, Andrews, you got to interview me." So, wow, think of all the great people that James Dobson has interviewed on the radio, we get to turn the tables.
Well, I changed my mind. Would you go sit down? I got something I want to say.
I got some questions I want to ask you.
Well,
Let me say, before you
Yeah.
say what you
All right.
wanted to say, after all, who has the gavel? Dr. Dobson, I think, even as I said last night, that there is no greater satisfaction to a father or mother than that we begin to be known as the parent of that child who has done well in the world. It's a great satisfaction that you can start something, move away, and see it sustain on the strength of the idea and the vision and the quality of the team that was put together after you hand over leadership. Tell us what you're doing after you have handed over the reins at Focus on the Family, and how's Focus doing, and how's your new radio venture doing?
well, thank you, John. I was at Focus on the Family for 33 years, which a 3-year-old once called Pocus in the Fanny, and I felt that it was time to step down. I think one of the biggest mistakes that a founder, president can make is to stay too long. And when you do that, you eventually either die in office or retire and don't leave an infrastructure to take over when you're gone. And so I just felt it was the thing to do. And so on February the 26th of 2010, I stepped down. Jim Daly had already been the president and CEO, and so the pieces were in place. And I resigned on the 26th of February and started a new ministry on the 27th. And it's called Family Talk, and that's what I'm doing now. I'm back on the radio, heard on 750 stations. You can find us at familytalk.org. And so that's the name of that tune.
Thank you. And is it true that you're going to be the honored guest at Colorado Christian University for President Armstrong's annual President's Circle dinner on the 22nd of September?
Was that a commercial? Yeah. Or a question?
It was a public service.
Yeah. I want to tell you, I'm honored to do that. I am getting better acquainted with Colorado Christian University. Senator Armstrong came and did 2 programs with us on Family Talk, and I'm telling you, I am impressed with that school and that man. And he is doing a fantastic job, and I don't know about you all, this has been one of the most stimulating weekends I've ever had. And
Well,
I'm also exhausted like you all are.
I'll now vacate the stage as I've been instructed to do, and I just have to say I've been kicked out of better establishments than this.
This will be very brief. I'm going to share something with you that Shirley, over here, Shirley, asked me to share with you. When John came and suggested that I make some comments, she sent me a note and said, "Tell him about Ronald Reagan." Well, Ronald Reagan's persona has kind of been here hovering over this place. Many people have mentioned him, and I'd like to tell you how I met him. Because I really admired that man so greatly. But the year was 1980, and he had just won the presidency, and he was inaugurated, of course, on January 20th, 1981. And I got invited along with 8 of our friends, Shirley and I did, so there were 10 of us, to the inauguration. And we were really excited about this because I've been so frustrated during the Carter years and what he did to the family and the things I care about. And so we took 4 couples, and we went with us to Washington. Now, we were going there just to try to catch a glimpse of the president from afar. And we were standing there on the west side of the Capitol building when Ronald Reagan made his first inaugural address. And we were so jazzed. It was the new beginning. I don't know if you remember that. And all over town, there was just a sense of renewal that I hope we have on 2012 again, or 2013 when a new president is inaugurated. But anyway, we were invited to an inaugural ball, and that occurred that night. There were 9 of them, and the president and Mrs. Reagan went to 8 of them before they got to us. We were at the what's the museum? I'm sorry? Good, the Smithsonian. We were there, and he never come. He didn't come because he's going to all the other balls. And finally, at midnight, we knew that he was on his way, and he had been to all the other ones. And so we were so excited about him coming. We were jammed in there. I mean, you could not move, and it was a cold night. And we had turned our coats in to the coat check place. And I turned to Jim Davis, who was with me, and said, Jim, you know, the president's coming, and as soon as he has finished and is through, there's going to be a madhouse rush to get our coats. We better go get it now. He said he agreed. So we went to get our coats, and big overcoats, and we had them over our arm, and we were coming back. The door swung open, and in came the Secret Service, all in tuxes, and they came tearing in and immediately went up a staircase. I looked at Jim, he looked at me. We said, why not? We went into the staircase too, and we followed the Secret Service. Secret Service looks ahead, they never look behind. I'm 6'2", he is 6'5", and we looked like Secret Service. We were about the right age, and nobody even looked at us. And we were climbing the stairs with these guys, came onto the second floor, and walked straight into Ronald Reagan. I mean, he was there. I was 3 feet away from him. And still they didn't know I was there. We were just standing there, we're beaming like crazy. And at that moment, they announced that the new president, Ronald Reagan, and his wife were coming into there's a huge room, probably bigger than this, jam-packed with people, and a platform like this, and blue uniform police that had cordoned off a walkway for the president to come up onto the platform. And he and Ms. Reagan took off alone, except that Jim and I were with them. Dumbest thing I've ever done in my life. We followed him all the way to the platform, just the 4 of us. We were walking, and we got up here, and the Reagans came up on the platform. I looked at Jim, he looked at me, and we said no. So we stood right there, I mean, right at the base of the platform. The Reagans came up and spoke, and then they danced, and by that point, the Secret Service were all on the edge of the platform looking out at the crowd. All of a sudden, they see me. This guy over here sees me. 2 men with heavy coats over their arm. And he didn't know what was under there or who these guys were. And he came tearing down there and used language that I've never heard before, and pushed us in the back and said, "Get out of here." And we got out of there, and we walked back down the corridor. But when we got to the end, the Secret Service came up to us, a man did, and we opened our coats, we showed the coats we had, said, "We just would like to greet him." And the guy let us do that. You know, just a month or 2 later, the president was shot. So you can see how loose the protection was for him. So we waited there. The president and Ms. Reagan came down, walked up that aisle, and walked right into us. But instead of shaking my hand, he turned the other way, and I've been angry about that ever since. But would you believe, 3 years later, I was in the cabinet room of the White House, sitting next to Ronald Reagan, advising him about how he could strengthen the family. And so it was just sort of an introduction that probably set off weeks of analysis of videos as to who those guys really were. Anyway, I got to get going. Thank you all. It's a pleasure being here. And Bill, I love you. Okay.
Dr. James Dobson, we love you. That was fun. Thanks for sharing that, Dr. Dobson. I take two thoughts away. One is the old proverb, of course, the Lord helps those who help themselves, but perhaps more to the point, once a strong-willed child, always a strong-willed child. Let me ask Ashton Cash and Representative Amy Stevens to join me on the platform, please. Exactly as occurred yesterday, we have reset what was to have been an introduction in person of one of our guest speakers by a member of the Colorado Republican delegation in the United States Congress. They're all being kept back on detention this weekend, of course. Truant, kept in after school because they didn't get their assignment done. And so Doug Lamborn, Mike Kaufman, Cory Gardner, who were to have been part of yesterday's program, all sent their regrets, and Representative Gardner sent a video message. Scott Tipton, U.S. Representative, a freshman congressman who defeated a Democrat with the help of Dick Morris last year, wanted to be here in person to say thanks to you, Dick. He has sent a video message. Before we knew that he was going to be doing that, we asked if the distinguished Republican Majority Leader of the Colorado House of Representatives would be with us also to share some thoughts about the work that they're doing at the state capitol for all of us, and then to assist in the introduction of Dick Morris. So we've got a double-barreled introduction of our guest speaker, and we're delighted that yet another wonderful CCU student, Ashton Cash, pre-med student from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, will present to you, formally as she deserves, Representative Stevens. Ashton Cash.
Today, it is an honor and a privilege to introduce to you a woman whose accomplishments are as unique and impressive as she is an individual. Her passion for the state of Colorado, as well as her desire to represent the voice of her constituents, is seen in her active role as a congresswoman representing the 20th District. As a representative, she has taken the important responsibility of upholding the Colorado Constitution as well as the Constitution of the United States, while advancing the true interests of those who have elected her. Although it is a difficult task, she has been sincere and principled in her approach to matters of legislation. Today, we honor her for her courage and her strength to work through the intricate issues before her. And even though there has been some controversy over the creation of the recent healthcare exchanges, both her and her opposition are following what they believe to be right and in the best interests of those residents of Colorado. Prior to holding public office, she has worked as a public policy and youth culture specialist for the Christian ministry Focus on the Family. Additionally, she has been a veteran of numerous Republican campaigns, including Colorado Governor Bill Owens and George W. Bush. She has served as a member of the El Paso County Republican Committee and a delegate to the 1996 and 2004 Republican National Convention. Please join me in welcoming Congresswoman Amy Stevens.
Thank you, sweetheart, very much. Well, yes, would that I am a congresswoman, but actually I am the State House Majority Leader, and I want to thank you for that. You know, I've been in office 5 years, and 5 years ago, I had two characters sitting on either side of me. One is now Congressman Cory Gardner, and the other is now Speaker Frank McNulty. And we were listening to one of our Democrat counterparts speaking one day, and all three of us were just getting nauseous beyond belief. And we said, I can't take it. I just can't take one more minute of this. And the three of us pinky swore that no matter what it took, we would win the House. Now, Cory ditched us and is on to Congress, and I'll forgive him for that. And the Speaker now, Frank McNulty, and I worked very hard in the last 3 years. We organized our freshman class. We got us moving in the right direction. We're here to take back Colorado. And we mean it, folks. We mean it. I want to thank the man, however, who has taught us about courage, and that is Dr. James Dobson, my former employer. I want to thank you a whole lot. You know, 19 years ago, I was working on a woman's right to know bill. I was pregnant with my son, and I was standing at the steps of the Capitol, and I would have to call it a divine moment, much like Herman Cain said today. I was standing at the stairs of the Capitol watching our friend Marilyn Musgrave speak, and something said, you're going to be here someday. You're going to be here at the Capitol. Couldn't put my hands on it, didn't know what it meant. And 19 years later, I'm here as the majority leader for the State House. And I count it a privilege and an honor every day to serve you very much. Folks, governing is not for the faint of heart. Governing, I will say again, is not for the faint of heart. And we have one vote majority. And that came at 197 votes. 197 votes that separate you from civil unions, that separate you from tax hikes, that separates you from a lot of things that we are the stopgap for. And the speakers in my two goals this year, defeat Obama and win a broader majority, because we can't just have one vote. Cannot have it at all. Now, where does Dick Morris come in? I want to tell you, I'm just so honored to be with you, because your wisdom, particularly as you know, you've guided America now. You didn't just guide Clintons and political people and my friend Cory and my friend Scott. You're guiding America because you're teaching us. And I really want to thank you for that. Your books, your book Catastrophe, your book Revolt, that everyone's going to come out and buy today. I want to, I do, buy his book. I want to thank you for that, because you've taught myself, you've taught others how to have courage in times that are very tough. And these are tough times. And my friend Scott Tipton, who's going to introduce you, sat in front of me on the House floor. And when Scotty said he was going to run, I said, Scotty, do you know what you're in for? I mean, you know this is huge. This is big. You're going to defeat an incumbent, and it's going to take a lot. And Scott was really amazing, because Scott just lets things roll off his shoulder, as you know, Dick. And he said, Amy, it doesn't matter. This is the hour. This is the time. This is what I have to do. So without further ado, I want to thank you. Thank you, Senator, too, for all your wonderful work. And thank you, John, for this incredible, incredible weekend. I'd like to turn it over now to my wonderful friend and colleague, Scott Tipton. And I want to thank you for your support for the State House and for the state legislature, folks, because it matters. It really matters. Thank you.
Hi, this is Scott Tipton, Congressman for Colorado's 3rd Congressional District. I'd truly love to be able to have the opportunity to be there with you and enjoy probably the best conservative political summit in the entire United States. And I want to congratulate all of you for taking time. Your voice and what you're going to be able to learn there is going to be critically important. Here in Washington, and the reason that I'm not there right now is we're dealing with the debt, the deficit, and the debt ceiling here in Congress. We've just had a vote. With bipartisan support, we defeated Harry Reid's proposal in dealing with the debt ceiling. That's a positive. We have to recognize in this country, and we have to have absolute support coming out of the other party as well, that it's simply not enough to raise the debt ceiling. We have to get this country back on the path to prosperity. That means that we cut spending in Washington, D.C., that we put caps on spending in Washington, D.C., and we have that opportunity to be able to put forward a balanced budget amendment for our states to be able to approve. We're going to continue to fight for that, and we'll certainly keep you updated as this continues throughout this weekend. It's my very high pleasure to have the pleasure of introducing to you perhaps the best political analyst that this country may have ever seen, Dick Morris. Dick, as I know all of you are well aware, is a renowned commentator on Fox News, someone who you can count on to be able to give you the inside scoop in terms of how elections are going to be won. He has the inside scoop. We need responsibility in Washington, D.C. We need to remember who is paying the bills. We need to remember that no longer will we send people to Washington who are going to do business as usual, because we've heard that story before. It's time to change the culture in Washington, D.C. Dick Morris has pointed out the path to be able to achieve many of those goals. He has a long history of success in political campaigns. I think he's going to deliver a message that is going to resonate with each one of you in terms of the importance of this process, the importance of getting the conservative mentality in Washington, D.C., and making this country, once again, the richest, the freest, and the most prosperous nation on the face of the earth. It's my great pleasure to be able to introduce to you Dick Morris.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm used to doing ads for them. I want to say something here tonight, today, that I said a year ago when I was here, and I intend to say every year when I come here, and that is that I have to humbly and gratefully thank former Senator Bill Armstrong for introducing me to my best friend, Jesus Christ. It's an interesting story. In 1992, right, we were working for Terry Considine, and Bill was running the campaign and I was advising on it. And I was a practicing atheist. And I went out to dinner with him once, with Bill, and I said, "You are the first intelligent person I've ever met who believes in God. Tell me about it." And I quizzed him on it. I was an Enlightenment student, anti-clerical. I was right out of Voltaire. And I went at him, and we had a fascinating dinner. And at about the same time, I was working for Mike Huckabee, who I helped get elected first lieutenant governor and then governor. And he was the second intelligent person I'd ever met that believed in God. That is not a comment on the paucity of intelligent people who believe in God. It's a comment on the limitations of my upbringing on the west side of Manhattan and New York City. And but none of it sank in. It was there, but I looked at it, but none of it meant much until my life fell apart. And then when my life fell apart, I got home, and there waiting for me was a gift-wrapped copy of Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, sent to me by Senator Armstrong. And in the other package was a Bible with my name on the front of it, sent to me by Mike Huckabee. And those set me on a long path. I was baptized a year and a half later, and it's made all the difference in the world. And I have to thank Bill Armstrong for leading me on that journey. So, to understand the importance of what's going on in Washington now in the fight over the debt limit, we have to understand what's going on in the economy in the United States and in the world. Get the business cycle out of your mind, the ups and downs of the business cycle. That's not what we're going through. We were going through it, but it's not now what's happening. We're familiar with the contours of that. The economy begins to get richer, and people begin to make more and more money, and they begin to become stupid about how they spend it. And they spend too much, they overextend themselves, they invest in a bubble like the internet or real estate or something, and then the bubble crashes, and people are way overextended, and they default on their loans, the banks are imperiled, the country enters a period of high unemployment, prices drop or at least stop rising, wages drop or stop rising, and then at that level of lower prices and lower wages, businesses can begin to hire people and consumers can begin to buy again, and we go back up and we go back up the upside of the business cycle. And we know that we've had recessions in basically every 4 or 5 years over the course of this country's history. We didn't have one between 83 and 92, 91. We had kind of a break. And we didn't have one during the Clinton administration, but then we had one under Bush and Bush Sr. and so on. But that is not what's happening now. What's happening now is a very different kind of cycle. It doesn't run in months, it runs in decades. And it's called the debt implosion cycle. Go back to the South Pacific bubble in the 1700s that burst, the Argentine railway stock collapse of 1872. Go back in our history to some of the huge changes in our global economy, and that's what you're witnessing now. Basically, starting in World War II, we began to borrow more and more money, and the United States took the lead in that, and businesses throughout the world and governments throughout the world incurred massive amounts of debt. Right now, the world owes, in private, corporate, government, and personal debt, not counting things like Social Security that we owe or pension obligations that we owe. I'm talking about actual IOUs, mortgage debt, credit card debt, state and municipal bonds, corporate debt, federal treasury notes, federal bonds of every country in the world put together, $160 trillion, 160. The GDP of the planet Earth is 60 trillion. So we owe 3 times what we make, 3 times what we're worth. The annual income of the planet is in the range of 45 to 50 trillion. So we owe 3 or 4 times what we earn. And what's happening is throughout the world, there is a debt repudiation cycle. People are refusing to borrow and spend. People are refusing to lend. Bondholders are refusing to believe in the bonds that they hold. And credit is drying up throughout the entire world. And that's what we're facing now. Now, a lot of people ask me, how could you have worked for President Clinton? And it was before the events I just described. But, you know, it'd be nice if we had him back there instead of Obama. We balanced the federal budget. We reduced the national debt. In fact, in 1998 and 99, the dominant economic concern in the world about debt was that there wouldn't be enough of it, that there wouldn't be enough treasury bills for banks to invest in something safe, even if it just had a minimal return. And they were kind of saying, don't eliminate debt. We need those treasury bills as a kind of vault or safe deposit box to put our money. So when Clinton left office, the United States was basically invulnerable to a debt repudiation cycle. We had lowered our national debt to in the neighborhood of 4 trillion. About 2 to 3 trillion of it was money we owed ourselves. Government owed to Social Security, which was not, Social Security wasn't going to close the government down. The worst that would happen is we'd have to pay for it out of tax revenues, not out of the trust fund. And things looked pretty good. Then Bush got hit immediately with 9/11, which slowed the economy down, triggered a recession, and created huge needs for spending for homeland security, for a military invasion of Afghanistan, and to strengthen the United States for the war on terror. And then he chose to go into Iraq, and whatever the wisdom or lack of it there, we don't really know yet. Chou En-lai was once with Henry Kissinger, and Kissinger said to Chou, "What do you think of the French Revolution?" And Chou said, "It's too soon to tell." So it is too soon for us to understand whether that massive investment in Iraq was worth it or not. It'll become apparent to us in decades ahead. But in any case, that set us back further, and then we were hit with Hurricane Katrina and the need to rebuild a huge portion of the United States. And then on top of that, we began to enter one of the business cycle recessions in 2007. Real estate values fell, and that slowed up tax collections and increased safety net entitlement spending. And when you put all that together, the $8 trillion debt had moved to about $10 trillion. And the United States was running deficits in the range of $400 to $500 billion a year. Then TARP hit at the very end of the Bush administration. And what happened was obviously this massive global panic about financial institutions. And again, wisely or unwisely, the government chose to bail those institutions out. And it lent about $700 billion to financial institutions. Now, most of that money was never actually lent. It was given to the Federal Reserve Board, which got a hold of Citibank and said, I have $100 billion sitting here for you. What do you want me to do with it? And Citibank said, keep it. Just pay me interest on it. And in October of 2008, they decided to pay interest on the money that was held on deposit. And about $500 billion sat in the vaults of the Federal Reserve Board, so nobody would mess with the banks because there was $500 billion backing them up, and everybody knew that if they began to try to profit from the bank's misdeeds or bad financial situation, they'd get clobbered because the government had enough money to back it up. Then Obama took office, and within the first 3 or 4 months, all of that TARP money was repaid. Never repaid, they just told the Fed, we don't need it anymore. The only people that didn't repay it were the $200 billion that went to AIG and to the government. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac never repaid their money. But all of the private sector, except for AIG, did repay it. But then what Obama did was, instead of pocketing the money and putting it back into the Treasury and running a budget deficit, it was higher than $500 billion because the recession was deeper. It was around 600, 650. Instead of putting that money back in the Treasury, he sent it out the door again, this time as spending, not as loans, which we would never get back. That incredibly unwise, ridiculous stimulus spending. And that raised our deficit from around 600 up to about 1.3 and 1.4 trillion. And then the recession did its work, tax revenues were slowed, entitlements soared, and the deficit just went completely crazy. And therefore, from the minute George Washington took the oath of office to the minute Barack Obama took the oath of office, the federal debt rose from 0 to $10 trillion. Under Obama, it's risen from 10 to 4.3 in 2.5 years. And it will, before the end of his first term, and hopefully his only term, rise to over 16 trillion. If we re-elect him, God help us, it will double during his presidency. And all of a sudden, the United States, that was basically invulnerable to the debt implosion cycle, became its prime victim. We took our place next to Greece and Portugal and Ireland and Italy and Spain, the countries that were way overextended. And all of a sudden, we were hostage to that cycle as well. Now, we're a little like the family that bought the subprime mortgage because we were sucked in by teaser rates. The interest rates now are ridiculously low because the Fed is printing the money. What's happening is that we set up the Bill Armstrong National Bank. And the Fed comes to Bill and it says, hey, Bill, do you have any Treasury securities in your vault? And he says, oh, my God, I'm wallpapering my bank with them. They're not making any money. I can't sell them. They're not worth anything. Well, I'd like to buy 100 million of them from you. And he says, you out of your mind? I say, yeah, well, I want to do it. And I write the check to him. And there's no money in the account. But I'm the Federal Reserve Board. I have just created $100 million. And then the Treasury comes in right behind me and says, hey, Bill, how about lending us $100 million? I understand you just came into it. And we borrow that $100 million back from Bill and pay him 3.5% for it. So we print the money, we give it away, and we borrow it back and we pay 3.5%. But at least we don't pay 7 or 8 or 9 or 10, because we're no longer borrowing the money from real lenders. We're borrowing it from ourselves. China hasn't bought any net increase in Treasury debt in 2 years. Japan stopped. Nobody is buying Treasury debt now. They're not even rolling over what they have. The debt is being entirely financed by printing money by the Fed and then borrowing it back. And the Fed is going to have to stop that. As a result of the Fed printing the money and borrowing it back, interest rates are very low. We owe $14 trillion. It's about 3.5% interest. Do the math. It's about $400 to $500 billion a year. That's not much in a budget of $4 trillion. It's pretty reasonable. But wait until the Fed has to stop printing the money, because if it keeps doing it, we'll be the Weimar Republic. We'll be wallpapering our homes with dollar bills. The dollar will just crash. So when they stop doing it, which they stopped in June, they're considering starting it again, but at some point they're not going to be able to continue it, we're going to have to borrow money from real lenders, and they're going to charge real interest rates. And when every corporation and every government and every state and locality all want to borrow the money at the same time, those interest rates are going to become very high. They're going to become 7 or 8 or 9%. And we'll be like that subprime family that was fine to afford a mortgage at 3.5%, but when it goes up to 7.5%, all of a sudden they can't make ends meet. And instead of having a $400-500 billion bill to repay every year, it'll be over $1 trillion. And just to put that in perspective, $1 trillion is the total of all of our income tax payments combined. Every 1040 income tax payment in the U.S. combined equals $1 trillion. So we'll be just like the subprime family that has to sign over their paycheck to the mortgage company. And then on top of it, Obama wants to eliminate the homeowner tax deduction so that all of a sudden your housing costs will be 35% higher because you won't be able to deduct them. And this is just an incredible disaster that's in the making. So it was absolutely vital, and it is absolutely vital, to slow the rate of growth in our debt, and then to stimulate the economy so that we can pay back the money we owe without getting absolutely massacred. And that's the background behind what's going on in Washington today. Now, it looks as if, as I speak, that the Senate is going to pass a deal for allegedly $3 trillion of debt reduction. And in return, they're going to raise the debt limit by about $2.5 trillion. Obama's only goal in this is to raise the debt limit by enough so it gets him through the election, so he doesn't have to come back and ask for more money. That's all he cares about. And he's going to likely get that. And in return, there will be a fictitious level of $3 trillion of savings in spending that have to eventuate. Now, not all of it is fictitious. About $1.2 trillion of it is real. The stuff that John Boehner got passed in the House, that's real. That is a serious, real cut in spending. Then there's another $1 trillion that Harry Reid threw in that is money that we pledge not to spend on wars that haven't happened yet. We promise that over the next 10 years we won't go to war with anybody and we won't send troops anywhere, and you can pocket the savings from that. That's $1 trillion of it. And the third $1 trillion of it, essentially, is money that Reid and McConnell claim we will find in the future. And they're appointing a bipartisan commission to study how to generate those revenues. Now, and by the, they're not permitted to consider tax increases as terms of the deal. Now, that's a complete fiction. They'll come up with a report, just like we've had 1 million reports. They'll recommend reining in Medicare and block granting Medicaids at the states and further cutting discretionary spending and trimming a little bit of defense. And all that is perfectly reasonable, but none of it is going to happen. Because Barack Obama doesn't want it to happen. He wants us to continue spending. Spending for Obama is not a means to an end. It is the end itself. Because, as I said when I spoke with you last year, socialism is a statistic. It's what % of the economy does the government control. And when Obama took office, state, federal, and local spending combined was 35% of the economy. Now it's 44% of the economy. And you cannot have a free market system with 44% of the revenues being eaten up by the federal government. And his goal is to spend that amount of money and de facto give us a socialist system. Just as the Republican goal, when you get down to it, isn't really to balance the budget, it's to cut the spending. It's to reduce it to a level where you can have a free enterprise system, where there's enough non-government money to make this work. And when you look at those different priorities, there's never going to be a further cut. We'll get the 1.2 trillion, and that's it. But I have an idea. I think that it's too late in the game for us to block this budget deal. And I think that if we do it, we'll be losing a lot that we've already won at the poker table. This government issue, this spending, this debt, has had a tremendously important positive contribution to Obama's defeat in 2012. He cannot masquerade as a moderate. He cannot pretend to be a centrist. He's revealed as a taxer and spender and borrower. He's revealed as someone that will do everything he can to be able to keep being able to borrow and spend more. And he's also shown himself to be a weak leader, incapable of really accomplishing anything, someone who basically is a good speaker and can't do much else. And the damage has been so significant that Obama has dropped from 55% job approval in the aftermath of the bin Laden death to 40% job approval now in the Gallup poll. And when you ask people, are Obama's policies making the economy better or worse? It's now 49% worse and only 35% better. And among independents, it's 50% worse, 30% better. Among white voters under 30, Obama's base, it's 48% worse, 34% better. So we're really getting at him. We're really eating his lunch. And we're going to his core base, and we're defeating, messing up his chances for re-election. And he's showing himself to be incredibly weak. When I worked for President Clinton, a large part of the country thought that, well, Clinton had two big negatives. A third of the country thought he was immoral, and a third of the country thought he was weak. So I went to him and I said, we can't do anything about the immoral part. I did say that. But we can do something about the weak part. By the way, when I got him to do this program of social values, of school uniforms and street lights and anti-drug and anti-smoking and make that a big deal, the way I sold it to him was that you need to convince parents that you can help them raise better children than you are. That's, you know, people say I criticize him these days, no more than I ever did. Just used to pay me to do it. But we could take care of the too weak, and in two areas. One is where he really stood up against genocide in Bosnia and intervened decisively, militarily. 250,000 people had been killed, and he ended it. And now they're falling all over themselves to turn in war criminals so they can make it into the European Union. It's one of the most successful military interventions we've ever had. And you know what American casualties were in that war? Zero. Zero. And we took this area that was ethnic cleansing, the most horrific kind of stuff, and we turned it into viable governments that now are getting into the European Union. The second thing we did was to stand firm against the Republicans and the government shutdown. And that increased Clinton's leadership ratings and strength ratings. When the fight began, he was at about 42% job approval, and when it ended, he was at 58% job approval. Obama has fought the same fight against the same adversary on the same turf and managed to lose 15 points instead of gaining 15 points. Because the spotlight has been on him, he's taken an untenable position, and he's been too weak in pursuit of that position. And it also is sapping his enthusiasm on the left. We have to understand that the reason Obama was elected was not that he persuaded anyone to switch, but that he persuaded people to show up. He was the first president since John Kennedy who increased the Catholic turnout to actually increase voter turnout in his base groups. No other candidate of either party has ever succeeded in doing that since World War II. And what he did was he raised young people's turnout, doubled the turnout of 18 to 24-year-olds. He increased African American turnout from 11% of the vote to 14%, and he increased Latino turnout from 7 to 8.5%. And he won those constituencies massively, and that's how he got elected. He got the same percentage of the white vote that Al Gore got. So it wasn't that he flipped anybody, it was that he turned people out. And now with the left criticizing him for this deal, calling it a surrender, the left looking at Guantanamo still being open and the economy falling apart, and we're still in Afghanistan and we're still there in Iraq, the left is getting very disenchanted, and that disenchantment will lead them to turn off Obama. It's doing it now. We're going to vote against Obama with our fingers. They're going to vote against him with their feet. They're going to stay home. And I think that the debt limit fight has served a tremendously important purpose. Now, it is true that John Boehner is less popular than Barack Obama, but who cares? He's not running for anything. See, when we fought the Republicans in the Clinton fights of 95 and 96, the head of the Congress was Bob Dole. He was the majority leader. And if we beat him on the shutdown, we'd beat him in the election. Here, John Boehner's not running for anything. McConnell's not running for anything. Their images can go way down and bring Obama down with them. So when people say, I hate Washington, that's cool with me, because the ones they're going to hate is going to be Obama, because he's the one that's up for re-election. And let me say that it is possible that we can have our cake and eat it too. Scott Tipton and Cory Gardner are two congressmen of whom you should be immensely proud. Let me be specific. They are the two of the 39 members of Congress out of 435 that voted right, in my view, both on the continuing resolution and on the debt deal. They're two of the 59 courageous Republicans who rejected the continuing resolution deal that Boehner negotiated. They said it was phony. They said, we promised $100 billion of cuts, you're delivering 38.5, and it turned out it wasn't even 38.5, it's probably less than 10. There are some estimates that say it raised spending. Totally phony deal, complete cave-in. The speaker was a cream puff. He had no guts on that one, and he got most of the two-thirds of the freshmen to fall in line and vote for him, but he didn't get Tipton and he didn't get Gardner, and that's to their credit. Then, when Boehner learns his lesson and really gets $1.2 trillion of serious actual budget cuts and really forces Obama and Harry Reid to repudiate the idea of tax increases because his little corporate jet class warfare ploy didn't work, then he puts a debt limit bill in front of the House, and a lot of the strong conservative Republicans vote no, which was the wrong vote in my judgment. Tipton and Gardner voted yes. They said, we are going to pass something. We're going to show that we can pass something. We're going to go from critics to governing, but we're going to insist, number one, that it be 1.2 trillion of cuts. Number two, that there be no tax increases. And number three, that there be a vote in the Senate and the House on the balanced budget amendment, which we're going to use to get rid of a lot of them. So they deserve a great deal of credit. Now what's going to happen is that they're going to coalesce into this phony deal, the $3 trillion. But inside the phony deal, there's still our original stuff. There's no tax hike. It's $1.2 trillion of serious spending cuts, and there's going to be a vote in each house on the balanced budget amendment, which is tantamount to handing over the Senate, because those guys are going to get massacred for their votes. But the question is, how do we get the extra trillion of cuts that are in the Reid package that haven't been enumerated? And I was talking to Pat Cadell outside a little bit, and he's right. You take the gun off the table of the debt limit, and Obama's never going to go along with any cuts. Obama's going to absolutely stonewall those cuts, and we'll never see that trillion of cuts. Well, I have a solution. Just wrote it in a column. Those of you that get my emails, please do, everybody. dickmorris.com. It's in your e-box right now. Just got sent out. And that proposal is that we don't vote a budget. See, it was a trifecta. The continuing resolution for this year, the debt limit increase, and the budget for next year. We still have leverage over the budget. And I believe the Republicans should say to Obama, we're going to give you a 6-month continuing resolution. You can keep the government operating at these reduced spending levels until December 31st. But on January 1st, we're not appropriating any more money. And at that point, you either make good on the trillion of cuts that are sitting out there from the debt limit deal, or we close down the government. And that'll work because it takes a majority of the House to pass a budget. It's not one of those deals where we need to get 60 votes in the Senate to overcome a filibuster. Negation works in our favor when you're closing down the government. And I think that it is a very good strategy. I think it puts Obama back in defending his tax and borrow and spending stuff, puts him right back into the middle of it. So I'm passing that idea on to the Republicans in Congress, and I hope that as soon as the debt limit deal is announced, they say, okay, now we'll give you a 6-month continuing resolution. The current debt limit deal has a thing where they say there'll be triggers. We'll punish ourselves if we don't cut spending. We'll punish the Republicans with defense cuts. We'll punish the Democrats with Medicare cuts. But that's baloney. What one Congress votes, the next Congress can repeal. This isn't a constitutional amendment. This is an act of Congress. And if they want to suspend the punishment from taking place and obviate the trigger, they can do so easily. They can't ever not do it. But they can't pass a budget without the House Republicans voting for it. So I think that that, combined with what's happening now, gives us a real path to getting this thing done. But let's not underestimate the magnitude of what we have achieved. We have produced by far the largest spending cut in American history. We have turned the corner on this incredible period of growth. Clinton never cut spending. Clinton, at best, reduced spending increases with the help of Gingrich. What happened was he cut taxes and stimulated the economy. The capital gains tax and the economic stimulation produced enough revenue so he was able to balance the budget. But this is a real, serious, significant spending cut, and it deserves our support, and the House Republicans deserve our thanks. Now, in a broader sense, what's happening with our economy? Why are we not able to create jobs? And the answer is that Keynesian economics assumes that we're automatons. It assumes that we obey laws of physics that are immutable, that happen whether we like it or not. Essentially, it assumes that if we are led to water, we will drink. So if we send out a tax refund, you're going to spend it. You're not going to pay down your credit card. You're not going to pay down your mortgage. You're not going to pay off your car loan or your student loan. You're not going to save the money in the bank because involuntarily you will spend the money because that's what the laws of physics say. You're not a sane, competent, conscious, intelligent human being who says this economy is in lousy shape. I got this money because I borrowed money from a government stimulus. I'm scared to death of whether the government will be able to pay its debts. I'm scared to death as to whether the dollar will retain any value. I'm worried about losing my own job. I'm worried about the economy. I ain't spending this money. I'm saving it and paying down my debt. You're not going to do that. You're going to spend it. And similarly, a corporation is going to say, hey, I just got money, just got a new line of credit from the bank. I'm going to run out and borrow all that money and expand my factory and my equipment. No, I'm not. I'm going to thank my stars I got that line of credit and use it to save myself from going broke when the economy continues to go downhill. I'm not hiring anybody. I'm not spending any of that. And corporations say the same thing. They're going to hoard their own assets, not reinvest them in their company, but keep them against a rainy day. So we've tripled the currency, the money supply, and nothing's happened. We've spent $800 billion on stimulus and nothing happened. And that's because consumers have used that money to pay down their debts by $400 billion over 2 years. Corporations are now sitting on $1 trillion of cash. And these days, cash earns like 2% interest. So it's a massive penalty for it, but they're willing to do it. And banks have $800 billion of surplus capital sitting on hand. And what's the Fed's solution? Borrow more money, print more money, put more money in circulation, another trillion, and they'll certainly spend it, which is total nonsense. It's completely wrong. Now, why aren't we spending it? Because of psychology. There's something other than the laws of physics that enter here. It's the laws of human nature and of rational, sensate human beings making informed and enlightened decisions. We're scared to death. There is a total lack of confidence in this economy. And the cause of the lack of confidence, the epicenter of that, is Barack Obama's policies. Who's going to run out and spend money when he's threatening tax increases? And when he threatens them on the top 2% of the country, well, that's neat. But the top 2% spends 33% of the money. And 75% of our economy is based on consumer spending. So a third of 75% is paralyzed by the threat of tax hikes. That's a quarter of the economy that's not doing anything. And he says he's going to repeal the mortgage interest deduction, but only on those making more than $250,000. Well, 57% of the value of home sales in the United States over the last decade have been to the top 2%. And now you're telling them that they're going to have to pay 35% more for their house because they can't deduct the interest on their mortgage and they can't deduct their property tax payments. Who's going to buy real estate in that situation? So he's terrorized those people. Then he terrorizes one industry segment after the other. The medical industry used to create 30,000 jobs a month. Now, the medical industry shouldn't be affected by a recession. People still get sick. And the money to pay for their care comes from the government as an entitlement for the most part. And if it doesn't, it comes from a private insurance policy as an entitlement. Very few people open their wallet and dole out $20 bills to pay for their medical care. This should not be sensitive to the fluctuations of the economy. But yet we're creating fewer than 10,000 jobs a month, where we once created 30. Why? Because everybody's waiting for the Obamacare to hit and wondering what the brave new world will be as to whether they'll get reimbursed. Only an idiot would open a new colonoscopy unit and buy an MRI and buy a CAT scan and hire 12 people when you don't know if you're going to get reimbursed for it. He's paralyzed that sector. And the manufacturing sector, there's tremendous demand for manufactured goods around the world. Look at how China's doing it. And the United States has been very competitive with China. This is something most people don't realize, but in 1980 and 1990 and 2000, we produced 25% of the world's manufacturing goods measured by value. We still do. China was at 2%, now it's at 16 or 17. It'll pass us in a few years, but we're still hanging in there in the mid to low 20s. We're hiring half as many workers. When I worked for Clinton, 18% of our labor force was in manufacturing. Now only 9% is, but we're producing twice as much with half as many workers because of automation. And here he wants to tax the energy that makes the machines run. So who's going to go out and buy new machinery when you may have to pay a carbon tax based on it that may make it uneconomical, and you may have to expand offshore in countries that aren't crippling themselves in their manufactured sector. So the manufacturing sector is expanding as slowly as it possibly can to meet the demand and not lose market share, rather than aggressively because of the threat of federal regulation. How about the energy industry? 7% of our economy. Well, he won't let you drill offshore. He's not issuing permits. Doesn't want to open up Alaska to drilling. And he recently is introducing anti-fracking regulations that make it impossible to drill for slate. And he's going to tax coal because of the carbon stuff, make it uneconomical. So what are we going to do, invest in windmills? And then you go to the main thing, the financial sector. There's nothing that is doing more to cause this recession and this unemployment rate than the Dodd-Frank bill. Not because of what it says, but because of how Obama is implementing it. The bill itself is not bad. It goes to Merrill Lynch and to Bank of America, and it says before you speculate in derivatives, you have to post collateral. So it's not just a free bet you can lay off. And it has a bunch of regulations for disclosure and collateral with big banks. And they're not perfect, but I think they're okay. But what they're doing is they're taking this law that was passed to regulate banks that are too big to fail, and they're using it on banks that are the smallest banks in the United States. We have 9,000 community local banks. They're the power of the American economy. 75% of the small business lending is from these 9,000 community banks. And 2/3 of the job creation is by small business in the United States. And they are absolutely the bedrock of our economy. So Dodd-Frank says that if you're an imprudent lender, we can audit your bank, fire you, replace your board of directors, wipe out your shareholder equity, which includes your pension, and force your bank to merge into a larger institution. And of the 9,000 banks in the United States, community banks, 400 or 500 have been closed down already by the FDIC, and another 850 are on their watch list. And the others are terrified. They're not making loans because they're scared to death. And when Obama says, find those new kids with a dream in the garage, or going to be the new Apple computer or the new Microsoft, and give them the capital so they can grow and prosper, baloney. If those kids don't pay you back, you lose your job and you lose your bank and you lose your pension. But please, go ahead and make the loans. So none of this is happening. Small business lending is down by over 80% over the last year and a half. And as a result, small business is not creating any jobs. Now, why is Obama doing that? Is he stupid? Doesn't he understand this? Why has he left the FDIC run wild? Here's why. Obama is not a socialist. He's a corporatist. If people understood the word, I'd accuse him of it. Socialism is a variant of Marxism in which everything is integrated horizontally. There's the working class, the management class, the capitalist class, the leisure class, the bourgeois class, the bureaucracy class. And the idea is that each class should unite in defense of its own interests against the other class. Corporatism, which is the system that's used in Japan and Western Europe, is a vertical integration. All the banks are part of one big bank. All the labor unions are part of one big labor union. All the consumer groups are part of one big thing. All the government regulators are responsible to one agency. And then the four of us sit down, deal the cards, and divvy up the economy and make all of the economic decisions for the country. That's how Japan works. That's how Germany works. That's how France works. It's how Britain used to work, and to some extent, but not completely, still does. And they always make the wrong decisions. They always come up with the wrong ones. The reason Europe prospered after World War II was because all they had to do was recreate what they had in the pre-war. And they're good at that. The reason it stopped prospering around 1980 was they ran out of the restoration. They had to adjust to the new economy, and they're terrible at innovation. They're always doing the wrong thing. Same with Japan. In 1990, MITI, their agency for planning, decided laptops weren't going to work. They weren't going to stay. Put your money into big mainframe computers for giant Fortune 500 companies. And the United States made the same stupid decision. But we couldn't control our banks. We couldn't enforce it. And the community banks said, you go stuff it. I'm going to give my loans to a small computer developer or a software developer because I think that's where the action is, and it was. But Obama wants this corporatist model which assures government control over the economy. Not government ownership, that is socialist, but government control, which is corporatist. To do that, you can't have 9,000 people running around the country making loans how they want. You can't have every bank just lending money to anybody who makes a case to them, and your free enterprise system. You got to bring them all into one big mega bank. You got to bring all the doctors into one big mega healthcare provider. You've got to bring all of the energy companies into one big conglomerate. And then you can run the country by running those conglomerates. Even if Obama were right, which he's not, what business did he have making these fundamental changes, injecting this level of uncertainty at a time when we needed confidence in order to sustain an economic recovery? FDR got it right. He had recovery in his first term and reform in his second term. And he paid for it in the second term. There was tremendous uncertainty. It fed a return to the Great Depression. He got good policies from it, though. It was a good trade-off. He got Social Security and the SEC and Food and Drug Administration, the Wagner Act, a lot of pretty good stuff. But the point is that the level of uncertainty is just what you don't need when you're trying to get out of a depression. And what Obama did was he said, recession, schmession. I have 60 votes in the Senate. I have the House. I'm the president. These stars are never going to be in alignment again. I'm going to pass everything. And it'll create uncertainty. It'll prolong the recession. It'll raise unemployment. I'll lose Congress. I'll probably be a one-term president, but I will have done what I will have done, and I will have assured my place in history. And I think that was his calculation. The only problem is that he was wrong. Because what the hand of man has passed, the hand of man can repeal. And that's what we're going to do. So that's the world according to Morris. I have something new which I've done on my website and my emails. I do a lunch video. How many people watch it? Good. Okay, well, the rest of you are missing out on it. If you like the speech today, I do 5 minutes of this kind of thing every day on a different issue. And sometimes they're about the issue of the day. One of the videos, generally on Saturday of the video and Sunday of the videos that are historic videos. I have one where I compare FDR and Obama. The one I did this past weekend compares Clinton's economic policies with Obama's. But they're neat, so go to dickmorris.com and sign up and I'll email them to you. But I hope you like them. Now, we are going to defeat Obama. And to understand how we'll defeat him, just think about how he got elected. Can he really increase his vote among Latinos from the 10-point margin that Kerry got to the 58-point margin that he got and sustain that in this next cycle? I don't think so. His job approval among Latinos is 52, and not the 70% of the vote that he got. Can he replicate the doubling of turnout of the 18 to 25-year-old voters in the face of this economy and in the face of the blame they're attaching to him? Maybe among college students he can do well, but those who've been in the job market looking for jobs, he's not going to be able to do that. And even on college campuses, with the discontent the left feels in him, that might even percolate to a primary, but certainly percolates now in discontent and criticism, can he count on that euphoric a reception? And can he continue to get a massive increase in the African American vote and continue to carry 98% of it? He'll carry it by a lot. He'll get an increase, but not the 3-point increase from 11 to 14 he got last time. And then I think there will be a massive increase in turnout among middle-aged and older voters who basically had enough, and among unemployed, blue-collar voters. I believe if the election were held today, Obama would win 193 electoral votes, and I think Colorado wouldn't be one of them. And the Senate, oh man, are we going to take the Senate. I mean, we're at 47 seats. North Dakota is a given. Conrad's leaving it, and it's an entirely Republican state. And we thank God Nelson of Nebraska will get what he deserves. The only question is, will he live long enough so that he survives the primary? But in any case, Nebraska, which is the single most Republican state in America, is going to elect a Republican senator. That brings us up to 48. In Virginia, where the incumbent is not running again, we have George Allen, who's a very strong candidate, and I think he's going to win there too. In New Mexico, which went Republican in the elections recently, Republican governor, new Republican congressman, the incumbent Democrat's not running, it's an open seat. I think we're going to win that. Wisconsin, where both houses of the legislature and the governor and the senator and 2 congressional seats flipped last time, I think we're going to win Wisconsin and pick up that vacant seat. I think that we have a superb chance of winning in Montana, where our candidate Rayburg is now ahead of Tester, the Democrat. I think that's going to be a wipeout. That's a takeaway. I think Nelson in Florida is in serious trouble. McCaskill in Missouri is in serious trouble. I think Stabenow in Michigan can be beaten. I think if we get a good candidate in Pennsylvania, we can defeat Casey. And I think Sherrod Brown is way, way too liberal for the state of Ohio, which we had huge gains in this election. The governorship, the legislature, and 5 House seats, and the Senate seat. I don't think Ohio is going to go for Obama, and I think that we can take it away from the Senate. So I think we're going to end up with a Senate majority in the mid-50s, not 60, but a lot. We'll end up with the White House. We'll end up with the Congress, probably gaining 10 or 15 additional seats. The reapportionment will give us about 10 or 12 additional seats, and then we'll take some others away. And then we can set to work saving the United States of America. Thank you. If we have time, I'd be happy to take questions. You guys gave me great questions last year. Yeah. Question is, how deeply did Clinton cut the Pentagon, and how much of the buildup that Bush had to go through was really just to restore us to our normal level? Well, there are really 3 parts to the Pentagon budget. The one is military manpower, and that Clinton cut very significantly, and Bush had to rebuild it because of the war on terror. The second was the civilian employees of the department, and there were about 1 million of them when Clinton took office, and he got rid of about half of them. And that's a cut, but it's a cut that has continued, and a cut that I think was a good one. And then there's weapons procurement, where he stretched it out for a long time. But it turned out that a lot of the weapons he stretched out we didn't really need, and a lot of the stuff we did need we weren't procuring. So I'm not sure that all of those were negative.
Hey, Dick, no question that we asked in the summit briefing materials over recent weeks attracted more interest and controversy than the question, can the Tea Party and the Republican Party work together sufficiently to win in 2012 as you've described? Let me take the prerogative of the chair. Let that be the last question and give us your thoughts.
Okay. Yeah, they can, they have to. I mean, you look at where they did, Tipton and Gardner. Look at where they didn't, Buck and Norton. And read the handwriting on the wall from that. The Tea Party has 3 functions: to animate the Republican Party and make it vital and strong again, to police it and make sure that it stays true to conservative principles, and to cleanse it through primary fights against people that are squishy. I look forward to the defeat of all those Democrats I ticked off, but I also look forward to the defeat of Orrin Hatch in Utah and Dick Lugar in Indiana. It's about time we had Republicans from those states. And I think the Tea Party is doing a fundamentally good job in doing that. Will it get carried away? Will it defeat some people that could get elected and replace them with people that couldn't? Yeah, you're going to have some of that. but I don't think it's going to be massive enough to take away the Senate from us. I think that it'll cost us maybe 1 or 2 seats here or there. Will there be a third party? No way. And will they animate our ranks and give us the enthusiasm and the energy to win the election? You bet they will. Looking behind John's question, though, is the basic issue of, do you want moderates or do you want conservatives? Now, when the major issues in our politics were social, you could win with moderates more easily than conservatives. You had a certain group that were pro-life, a certain group that were pro-choice, and a large group in the middle, where they said it depends on whether it's rape or incest or third trimester or whether there's counseling, whether there's parental consent, or Medicaid funded, all that kind of stuff. And if you ran somebody who was hard pro-life, he would be cut off from a lot of those middle voters, and same for the left. Gay marriage, same deal. But now, the major issues are not social, they're economic. And when a guy gets up there and says, I'm for a few tax increases and a moderate level of spending cuts, you hoot him down. They don't want that. They want someone who really is going to cut spending, who really is not going to raise taxes. I mean, you can propose an artificial series of taxes like on corporate jets and get a majority in the poll for it. But in reality, if you have 2 candidates standing there and one says, I want huge cuts in spending, and the other says, I want some cuts in spending, you're going to vote for the huge cuts. There is no moderate in that issue. It's not a left-right spectrum. The issue becomes sincerity versus insincerity, reliability versus unreliability, not a left versus right spectrum. And therefore, I think the Tea Party candidates are very often the candidates that can win because they really lay out a clear course of action and a clear agenda. And I hope that they will. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, a great comrade at the summit, a great friend of Colorado Christian University and Centennial Institute, a great patriot, a great political warrior, as he has told us, a great convert to Jesus Christ, Dick Morris.